Shalom and blessing to you. Not long ago, a new student came to my office to be interviewed. And as I interview everyone, or each and every student, I asked him about his exposure to the study of Torah. And I asked him what he would like to study. He answered me, I want to study Talmud. I want to study the Talmud. I want to study the Gemara. I said, well, you have a good will and desire. And I followed up with a few questions. One of them was regarding his knowledge of something before the Talmud, before the Gemara, the Chumash, the Bible. I asked him some simple questions about the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He had no idea of what I was talking about. Inside my heart, I perhaps was a bit amused, but here is something that I'd like to share with you. And I asked him the following: do you think you can really study the oral Torah? All these branches and details and particulars before you study the written Torah, the Chumash? And that's what I'd like to share with you together. The centrality, the importance, and perhaps deep significance of the study of the Chumash as something basic, something very fundamental. Maybe we can ask ourselves, when we analyze inside the Chumash, remember there are 5 books: Bereshit, Genesis, Shemot, which is nicknamed Exodus, Vayikra, which is nicknamed Leviticus, Bamidbar, in the desert, in the wilderness, and Devarim, Deuteronomy. The order, of course, is not by chance. And the fact that the Torah starts off with Genesis, Bereshit, before there's the nation of Israel appearing on the scene, before Sinai, before the acceptance of the commandments at Sinai, Bereshit is the first book. Why? Do you know why? Can you give me some insight? Why? Or what's the significance of Bereshit prior to all the other books? Together, let's analyze this matter. And before we get to beginning the answer, I'd like to share with you a few analogies. Man, you and I, do you know what we're likened to inside the Bible, inside the Chumash? There's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that states, Ve'ha'adam ki eitz hasadeh. Yeah, you, man, you're likened to a tree in the field. Please don't take offense. I'm not calling you a tree, of course. However, what's the analogy? A man is like a tree. You did some gardening the other day. You took out all the weeds around the tree. You made sure the bark is sitting on good, solid ground with good fertilizer, without any weeds interfering. What's underneath the bark? Of course, the roots. You have a healthy tree. The branches are spreading out. Where does it stem from? Solid roots in the ground. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any branches. Remember that. The central, the general part of the tree, the bark, comes before the branches. I know you want the fruit. I know your objective is to eat the fruit. But without a solid bark and roots, you wouldn't have any fruits because you wouldn't have any branches. That's one point. Another point. One of the most important commandments the Jewish people have in all of the Torah is the declaration of faith of God. What we commonly call the Shema Yisrael. Okay? There's a mitzvah that a person receives upon himself twice daily. He declares faith that he has in the God of the world and the God of Israel, and that the God is one. That's part one of a big mitzvah called the reading of the Shema. There's part two, the second paragraph. By the way, these paragraphs they are paragraphs taken out of the Torah from the book of Deuteronomy, the fifth book, Devarim. The second paragraph starts off with the words, Vehaya im shamoa. And it'll be when you hearken, when you listen to do my mitzvot, then God will give us rain in its time and blessing, and so on and so forth. There's a famous rhetorical question brought in Talmudic literature. We call the Mishnah, in the tractate called Masechet Brachot. And the Mishnah rhetorically asks, and I'll quote the Mishnah with your permission first in Hebrew, Lama kadma shema le vehaya im shamoa. Namely, why did the paragraph of Shema, why does it come first prior to the second paragraph, vehaya im shamoa? Now you might want to provide an answer and say, or you may have previous knowledge, and you might want to say, well, Shema comes first in the Torah. It comes earlier inside the Chumash as to the second paragraph, Vayam Shema. You're right, but you're wrong. You're right that Shema appears earlier, that paragraph appears earlier in Deuteronomy than the second paragraph. But that can't be the answer for the following reason. The mitzvah of reading Shema has three paragraphs. Shema, V'haya im shamoa, and there's a third paragraph called the section of Tzitzit. Do you know where that section appears? That appears in the fourth book, not in the fifth book, in book number 4. So what do you see? That these three paragraphs of Shema are not in chronological order at all, whatsoever. Because the third paragraph comes even before the first two paragraphs. So we go back to the question, why indeed does Shema come before Vayam Shemoah? The Mishnah gives an answer, of course. But from this answer, many of our great teachers and rabbis and mentors, like Rabbi Kook and others, have taught us an entire educational philosophy. The answer the Mishnah gives is Kodem, first. Adam yekabel el atzmo ol malchut shamayim, tchila. First, a person receives upon himself faith in God. V'achar kach, and afterwards, ol mitzvot, the yoke or the burden of mitzvot. Shema Yisrael represents faith in God. V'hayim Shema represents all the particulars in mitzvot. What should really come first? What should be our educational attitude and philosophy to Torah? First, understanding the generals, the fundamentals. Faith comes before all the branching out of mitzvot. That's the answer that gives. Take that into heart as well when we're studying the book of Bereshit. We'll get back to that in a moment. A third point I want to share with you. One of the great minds of the Jewish people in the medieval periods was the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, commonly called Maimonides, in Spain, many, many of his years. He wrote an unbelievable masterwork in Jewish law, codified law, called the Yad Chazakah, the strong hand. That's a book of law that's divided into 14 separate books. Could you guess what would be the first book? Do you think it's the laws of putting on tefillin? The laws of koshering meat so you can have a nice steak or hamburger? Do you think the first laws are the laws of perhaps giving charity to the poor? The first book that the Rambam writes in his mastermind is called, in Hebrew, Sefer Hamada, the book of knowledge. Knowing God, believing in God, understanding God, how He manifests Himself, how He reveals Himself, the principles of faith. What do you understand from this? That when we're coming to approach the Torah and even its codified law, faith comes before all the particulars, all the branched out commandments and laws of the mitzvot. What about the book that we're analyzing, Sefer Bereshit? Do you know it has a nickname? The nickname given by the prophets and others is called Sefer HaYashar. We can learn a lot from this. Sefer HaYashar, the book of the just, or more, the book of the fair people, the honest people, the people that are straightforward. Who are we talking about? Who are the Yesharim? Who are the straightforward people in this book of Bereshit that God decided to start the Torah off with this book? It's obviously the forerunners of the nation of Israel, what we call the patriarchs: Avraham, Abraham, Yitzchak, Isaac, and Yaakov, Jacob. They are called the honest, the Yesharim, the upright, the straight leaders, the forerunners of the Jewish people. Is that clear to you? Is there something you want to ask? Why? Why are the patriarchs given this title? Wouldn't you have thought, I would have thought this, that they would be called the righteous? They're always doing the right things. And they're even saintly. But you know, they're not called the righteous. They're called the Yesharim, the straightforward, honest, very special leaders, forerunners of the nation of Israel. If we look at one of the prophets of the nations of the world and analyze his words, which are recorded in the fourth book, in the book of Bamidbar, Bilam was his name. He was a rotten person. However, God gave him the art, the power of prophecy. Do you know the wish that he made? The prayer that he made to God? He said the following, note the words: Tamot nafshi, mot yisharim. He prayed to God and he asked God, let me die the death of who? The Yesharim, the straightforward, the fair, the honest. Let me die a death like the patriarchs of Israel. They're called the Yesharim, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Wow. Isn't that interesting? That Bilam wants to die a death of the Yesharim. He too terms the patriarchs a very important term, Yesharim. Is there anywhere else in the text of the Chumash the word Yashar? If we turn to the last book, Devarim in Deuteronomy, in the song, one of the songs that Moshe, that God really sang to Moshe, called Shirat HaAzinu, the Song of HaAzinu, there we come to an interesting prophecy that God Himself is called Yashar. I'll share with you the quote. In chapter 32, verse 4, it states, Tzadik v'yashar hu. It's an excerpt of an entire pasuk that I'm not quoting now. It's not the matter. God is tzaddik, He's righteous. V'yashar hu. God is fair. He's honest. What's the depth of these words that God is a tzaddik and yashar? One of the great scholars, just a few hundred years ago, in the great city in Europe called Volozhin, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuder, Berliner, he says the following. He says a terrific prophecy here is noted here about the Second Temple period. Let's go back to the Second Temple period time. The nation of Israel, part of them, is living in the land but many, many things are lacking in the Second Temple. And really we're talking about a downfall, a spiritual downfall of the nation of Israel. And here, there's judgment of God to the Jewish people. There's destruction. There's the exile of the people out of the land. And why is there exile? And why is God bringing destruction to the nation? Weren't the features and the highlights of many, many individuals of the nation of Israel, weren't they so scholarly? Weren't they so wise? Weren't they so pious and even saintly? Didn't they develop the oral Torah? Remember the Mishnah and the Gemara? So if there's so many Torah scholars, why was there really destruction to the Jewish people and to the land of Israel and to the temple? Rather, this great scholar, the Netziv of Volozhin, explains that it was the continuation of the next verse in that song of Hazinu, Dor Ikesh. We were a crooked generation. On the one hand, they were scholars. They were very wise. They encompassed worlds of Torah. However, they were not honest enough. They were not straight enough in their societal manners, in their conduct and behavior. What happened? They saw fellow Jews, other groups of Jews, even scholarly Jews, but their divine reverence, the fear in God was not like theirs. The emphasis that they laid on was not like theirs. And therefore they didn't accept them. They didn't treat them as an equal. They looked down upon them. They frowned upon them. And this was part of what we call the sinat chinam, the innocent hatred. They were not straight and honest, accepting and tolerating others. Rather, in their hearts, they were suspicious of these types of Jews, that their fear of God was not exactly like theirs. They didn't accept them. What did that lead to? They led them to saying that these people are deviating. They're not good Jews. They're going away from the path of Israel. And you know what it even led to? Murder. That's right, murder. The innocent hatred. When you don't accept another Jew and understand him, where he's coming from, and he's not exactly identical to you, it led to the most unfortunate thing, murder. When a person has bad attributes, when he's lacking true honesty and fairness in accepting other Jews, then it can lead to the most terrible things in society. Yet God is demanding us that we have to be just like God. Just like God is tzaddik v'yashar, He wants us also to be yashar, to be honest, to be tolerant. And that is the praise of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The main points of the book of Bereshit is that the forefathers, they're very special and honest. They accept others and tolerate others. One just small episode we'll share, and that is regarding Avraham. When an angel of God is sent to Avraham to bring the message of the upcoming destruction of the wicked people living in the Dead Sea area of the cities of Sodom and Amorah, Avraham goes to war, a spiritual war, and prays to God, save them. Maybe they're righteous. Maybe there's a core, a center, a heart in the city that for that the people will rectify their lives. Avraham, he loves the creations of God, and he wants to justify them. That's the honesty, the fairness. Even people that are right now full of wickedry, cruelty, maybe there's a chance to go back, to repent, and do better things. And for this perhaps maybe could be the major message of the book of Bereshit, before the books that we're going to meet up with all the commandments of God. The proper conduct, derech eretz, the proper behavior, the underlying faith in God and the goodness in the people on the planet of earth. That's what our sages called derech eretz kadma leTorah. Derech eretz, the proper conduct and behavior, precedes the Torah. The proper conduct and character traits that comes before the mitzvot. Maybe we can share together in the future many learning periods of studying about the book of Bereshit was so fascinating about the character traits of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which is really you. Because what's inside Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is really inside the nation of Israel. Have a great day today.